The headlines hit like a thunderclap. 10 U.S. governors just signed a deal with Carney. Bypassing Trump. Bypassing Washington. America is. For a moment, the country stopped breathing. Cable news anchors shouted over one another. Social media exploded. Commentators called it rebellion, courage, betrayal, leadership, depending on which side of the screen you stood on. But far from the noise, in a modest kitchen in Ohio, Governor Elena Ramirez sat alone at her wooden table, staring at the copy of the agreement she had just signed. Her hands were still trembling. She hadn't signed it to defy a president. She hadn't signed it to make history. She had signed it because her state was drowning. Factories had closed. Farmers were struggling under retaliatory tariffs. Small businesses were collapsing under economic uncertainty that shifted with every morning tweet. Parents were calling her office in tears because their retirement funds were vanishing, and their children were leaving for states with better prospects. For months, she had waited for Washington to stabilize the chaos. For months, she had pleaded in private meetings for clarity, for cooperation, for a path forward. Instead, she got silence, or politics. And so when the proposal came, quietly, discreetly, from across the northern border, she listened. Mark Carney, Canada's steady-handed financial architect, had been speaking openly about regional economic resilience, cross-border energy stability, manufacturing partnerships, supply chain coordination that didn't swing with every political storm. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't partisan. It was practical. 10 governors, Republicans and Democrats, had been invited to exploratory talks. No grandstanding. No cameras. Just spreadsheets, economists, and uncomfortable truths about how intertwined their economies already were. They didn't agree on everything. In fact, the first meeting nearly collapsed. Governor Reed of Texas accused Ramirez of undermining federal authority. Governor Walsh from Michigan warned that auto jobs would disappear without coordinated action. Governor Hayes from Georgia worried about political backlash. Every one of them feared being labeled disloyal. But then the numbers came out. Energy grid vulnerability charts. Manufacturing loss projections. Agricultural export data showing farmers being squeezed between tariffs and global shifts. This wasn't about bypassing Washington. It was about survival. Carney didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a man who had seen financial collapse up close. He had weathered crises before. He didn't promise miracles. He offered stability. A cross-border energy agreement that would lock in predictable pricing. A regional manufacturing framework that would shield key industries from sudden federal shifts. An agricultural export corridor that would protect farmers on both sides of the border. It wasn't glamorous. It was steady. And steady was exactly what their people needed. Still, signing meant risk. When word leaked before the official announcement, Washington erupted. Accusations flew. Legal scholars debated constitutional boundaries. Cable networks ran split screens, the White House podium on one side, the governors on the other. States don't conduct foreign policy, one commentator snapped. We're not conducting foreign policy, Governor Ramirez replied at her press conference. We're protecting our citizens. Her voice wavered, but only slightly. The backlash was brutal. Protesters gathered outside state capitals. Some accused the governors of undermining national unity. Others called them heroes for showing independence. Governor Reed's approval ratings dropped overnight. Donors threatened to pull funding. Party leaders whispered about primary challenges. At 2 a.m., he sat in his office staring at photos of his state's flooded refineries and laid-off workers. He had signed the deal because his energy grid had nearly collapsed the previous winter. He had signed because he couldn't bear another storm leaving families in the dark. Politics was loud. But suffering was louder. Behind closed doors, federal lawyers reviewed the agreement line by line. The White House hinted at legal action. Tension climbed. Then something unexpected happened. The market stabilized. Energy prices in the participating states leveled out. A major auto manufacturer announced it would keep 2 plants open, citing the new cross-border stability framework. Farmers reported renewed export contracts through the new corridor. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks. But families began noticing something simple: predictability. In Michigan, a father named Thomas Blake stood on the factory floor where he had worked for 22 years. He had braced himself for the closure announcement. Instead, management confirmed the plant would remain open, protected under the regional manufacturing deal. He went home that night and hugged his teenage daughter longer than usual. In Iowa, farmer Ruth Jensen checked her updated grain contract and felt something she hadn't felt in months: relief. In Texas, during the next winter storm, the reinforced cross-border energy agreement prevented the catastrophic outages that had once left families freezing. The political war in Washington continued. Speeches were made. Accusations were thrown. But on the ground, something quieter was happening. Governors who had barely spoken before were now coordinating weekly. Republican and Democratic administrations were sharing data. Policy teams were collaborating not to score points, but to solve problems. They had bypassed Washington. But not because they rejected America. Because they believed America was bigger than one city. Governor Ramirez visited a small-town diner months later. The owner, a gray-haired veteran named Harold, recognized her instantly. "I didn't vote for you," he admitted bluntly. She smiled. "That's okay. But my grandson still has his job at the plant," he continued. "And that matters more than politics." That night, she finally slept without the weight crushing her chest. The legal challenges never fully materialized. Federal officials, facing improving economic indicators in the 10 states, quietly shifted their tone. Public criticism softened. Some even began exploring similar frameworks. What began as controversy evolved into a blueprint. Not for rebellion. For cooperation. America wasn't fragmenting. It was adapting. The deal didn't solve every problem. There were still disagreements. Still ideological divides. Still moments of tension. But something had changed. Leaders had chosen responsibility over fear. They had risked their careers for stability. And ordinary people had felt the difference. Months later, at a joint press event along the U.S.-Canada border, the 10 governors stood side by side. No party banners. No campaign slogans. Just a shared statement about economic resilience and regional partnership. The cameras clicked. Critics still spoke. But behind the noise stood factory workers, farmers, small business owners, people who cared less about political theater and more about whether they could pay their bills and keep their homes. America is not a building in Washington. It is not a single office, a single party, or a single personality. America is governors who listen to their people. It is workers who show up every day despite uncertainty. It is leaders who take risks when comfort would be easier. When the headlines first declared that 10 governors had bypassed Washington, it sounded like division. But in the quiet towns and factory floors and frozen farmlands, it felt like something else. It felt like courage. And perhaps that is what America truly is, not blind loyalty to power, but fierce loyalty to people. Not chaos, but resilience. Not noise, but action. And sometimes, when the system trembles, leadership doesn't shout. It signs a piece of paper with trembling hands, and chooses stability anyway.